Because I always go, did I count?
necessarily bring them sold a lot.
Yes, sold more than a few. Happy.
Everybody's here, right? Places, everyone? Okay, just one quick reminder. Book sales on that side and book signing over there. And take it away.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on this panel to talk about Blue Hour with author Tiffany Clarke Harrison. My name is Rosa, and I'm a poet and a teacher from Richmond, Virginia, and I'm really excited to be in conversation today with this author. The Virginia Festival of the Book is a program of the Virginia Humanities. These are the things I have to tell you. Yes. Uh-oh. No. Oh, no. Sorry about that. All right. Okay.
Much better.
The Virginia Festival of the Book is a program of Virginia Humanities, a statewide organization whose mission it is to connect people and ideas to explore the human experience. In a few minutes, we're going to introduce our panelists. That's what it says. I'm going to skip that part. We have a bookseller on site. Just a reminder, getting your book signed is a great way to meet the author. I know some of you were in a book club who read the book, and if you, and those of you who are not in a book club, think about joining. They look really nice. But yes, as soon as this event is over, as soon as we're done talking, we'll have opportunities for questions, and then opportunities to sign the book. So I think I have to say something about the sponsors. I don't see it, so I'm just going to introduce Tiffany. Tiffany Clarke Harrison's debut novel, Blue Hour, chronicles a mixed-race woman's harrowing journey through contemporary American motherhood. And that is the book we're going to talk about today. But before we begin, Tiffany, would you read to us a selection from the book?
Sure. So this, can you all hear me okay? I read this part. I was doing a reading in New York in September, and my agent came out to that reading, and it was the first time in 5 years of knowing her that I'd met her, so it was very exciting. But then also, I didn't get a chance to speak to her before reading, and then I read this part, and then afterwards when we were talking, she said, I was wondering on the train over here which part you were going to read, and then you started, and I was like, wow, she just really got right in there, and she just really went for it with that one. So I would be reading a heavy scene today, and if there are just trigger content warning for anyone for miscarriage. So if you do not know, Blue Hour is a fragmentary novel, so it's told kind of in vignettes. And just for the ease of reading, it's going to sound a little bit more fluid. I'm going to cut out a couple parts just for the ease of listening. So, and this scene takes place right after the main characters. So Blue Hour is about a couple who's dealing with infertility and miscarriage. And the wife is Black and Japanese, the husband is white Jewish, and they're undergoing IVF. And she's a photographer. One of her students is killed by police, or is shot by police, sorry. And she tells her husband, if this next run of IVF doesn't work, I don't want to keep trying. And so this happens right after a car accident that they were in. A week and a half after Jameson sprung you from a holding cell, I have been released from the hospital. The sound of metal on metal branded in my memory wakes me in the middle of the night. I know that it was only a dream or a nightmare or some other piece of subconscious fiction, but I still wake in alarm. I take one deep breath, then another. Your arm rests across my body. Your father's face is one of many that look up at me from your tattooed sleeve. It is 3 a.m. I won't fall back asleep. I never do. 4:43 a.m. I don't feel right. A wave of nausea pulses through me and nudges me from the stream of consciousness rambling the mind engages when it knows it should be quiet. I am thinking of the salad I made for lunch, how I should not have put the cashews in with the greens. By noon, they will have lost their crunch and be gummy between my teeth. I think of my shoot next week with 2 restaurants in Greenpoint and another in the West Village. One had Moroccan tile floors of orange and blue and white and a complicated pattern that reminded me of parasols and lace. The frames on the bathroom mirrors were covered in gold foil. And I think of the beach, where Viola and I floated on our backs in the ocean as my father helped 8-year-old Maya build a sandcastle, and my mother twirled the strings of her hat that tied beneath her chin. Water tickled her toes on the shore. It was our first vacation. We drove to Ocean City, Maryland, and my parents were so proud. At night, we'd make a bonfire, lie in the sand, and watch the stars. The sleepaway camp to which I'd gotten a scholarship was in Washington, D.C. They were going to drop me off on their way back home, and I hiccuped half to death the night before we left. Whenever you get lonely, Viola said, just look for us in the stars. Me and Maya and Daddy and Mom will be right there. That's what I am thinking when my water breaks and I go into labor, of me and my sister at night on the seashore, water and sand gliding beneath our feet. My lower half is soaked in liquid warmth, like I have kissed the bed and am too ashamed to call for help. When I finally manage to swing each leg out of bed and stand, the sheets are soaked to the mattress in a watery pink and brown mess. I feel like I have to go to the bathroom. I know what this means. I shuffle to the bathroom, gripping my nightshirt, holding my breath, and run water in the tub. Hey, you stand in the doorway, face scrunched and squinting with sleep, braving the light with terror. Your hand is held just above your eyes, fingers bent and spread like window blinds, slats to peer through. What's going on, you say? We're about to meet our baby. But you're only 18 weeks, it isn't time. I nod. It is, Asher. I think it is. Your face crumples and you hold me while a contraction rips through my core. We cry. You sob into my neck, gasping, squeezing me to you and rubbing my back as my tears soak your bare chest, nails claw your sides. My legs buckle and you hold me up. You hold me up, you hold me up, I fall apart. I vomit, you hold me up. The wave of pain passes and we undress. You smooth your hands down each of my cheeks as if reading my face. You kiss them. You kiss my forehead and cheeks. I love you. I love you. I love you. I repeat it. I don't know if it's louder in my head. This wailing in my head. I love you. We cannot let the baby go. We must let the baby go. We cannot. I cannot. I cannot. I must. Naked, we step into the bath water. I sit between your legs and begin to push. my hands in yours, fingers entwined. Grunt, cry, push, no. Squeeze my legs together, ripping, ripping. Grunt, cry, push, no. Squeeze my legs together, baby, please don't go. Squeeze my legs together, please don't go. But I cannot keep her, she has to go. Push, no, no. Squeeze, 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 legs together, please don't go. But I cannot keep her, I cannot keep her, she has to go. Legs splay, legs squeeze, legs splay, legs squeeze. Please don't go, please don't go. Squeeze, Asher, please don't let her go. We bury our daughter Ellis. We are beneath large trees whose old chipped trunks stretch into bare branches that greet the slate gray sky. Their jealous roots creep out through the soil and grass. Jameson and Erica are with us. They were the only two invited, though neither of them knew I was pregnant. But Erica sat in the hospital with me for days, and they came to the ER after I delivered Ellis. Ellis. She was a once living thing with a heartbeat, and I saw her, felt her perfect tininess as I cupped her in the palms of my hands, as you cupped her. She was almost weightless, and you sat in the tub staring into the water, where your hands kept her because you didn't want your stillborn daughter to get cold. I had gone to fetch something to wrap her in, and came back with a blanket that belonged to my father. Are you sure? You asked. I'm sure, I said, and then blood spilled down my legs. The groundskeepers shovel dirt on her like a secret I am too weak to carry. You go alone to the hospital to pick up an envelope at the main desk of the maternity ward. Inside the envelope are the few things about our daughter that we will ever know, like the circumference of her head, the length of her body, how the lines of her footprints and fingerprints swirl. But you come home with nothing. I couldn't, you say, and lumber to the bedroom, loosening your tie. I see Ellis every night. Sometimes she is in my dreams, a fully developed fetus, tumbling in the bounds of my expanding uterus. She stretches and kicks, alive. I am one of the lucky ones. I am a planet. She is getting too big, growing beyond the shelter that I can provide, and she pushes with her little foot. You see the outline of heel and toes on the expanse of skin above my sore, clicking hip. Sometimes she is a little girl. Her hair is curly and dark, pulled back into one ponytail puff of ringlets and coarse swirls. She prefers rompers to dresses, and a pink toy hammer is her favorite. She hammers the plant pots in the living room, the wooden cabinet doors of a bureau in the hall. The hammer squeaks as she pounds it, and my daughter squeaks too. We take long walks to the library or to the park and buy croissants on the way home. She likes almond the best, with lots of confectioner sugar. She takes big bites and her lips are powdered with white. When we stop at your store, you place fedoras and newsboy caps on her head, a bow tie around her neck. She sits in the leather chair with one of your Words for Every Man books and pretends to read. Her dark eyes jump and skip across the letters. And sometimes Ellis is a monster. Sometimes she is that translucent creature of paper-thin skin in the bloody bathwater. She slithers from between my reluctant legs, and her winding blue veins are the roadmap to death, that place with which she is already well acquainted. Where is that Ellis, the one we buried? Is she a wee fox in the woods, as you like to think, playful and toppling over sticks and moss and katydids? Is she a star, burning bright with rage, burning bright with love? Does she know that I love her? Does she find her sibling, her grandparents, and aunt? Or is she alone? Is she afraid of the dark? Does she cry out for her mother?
I feel like we all need a deep breath, but in a good way. I'm gonna use my phone. My questions are on it. I'm not just texting a friend.
Microphone.
Tiffany, can you tell us what sparked the idea for this book?
So to start out, I knew that I wanted to write a book about a couple dealing with miscarriage and infertility, and I wish I could tell you why, but I can't. I knew I wanted it to be a multi-ethnic couple. I knew there was going to be some tension there at some point. I just didn't know exactly what it was. I wrote about 30 pages, and they were beautiful, and the sentences were lovely, and all that kind of stuff, but it was very much like, I don't know, I have no idea where this is going. I'm just writing pretty things at this point. And then this was about 2015-ish, I think, and Michael Brown was killed. And I can remember reading Facebook comments, and people saying things almost as if to justify that this child was left in the middle of the street, just dead in the middle of the street like an animal. And it was around my son's 5th birthday, and he was blowing out candles in the dining room on the table, and I remember looking at him and thinking, this is what they will say about him. And there comes a point, like I said, he was 5 at the time, where people come up to you and they're like, oh, he's so cute, he's so handsome, he's so this. But there seems to be a point where something kicks over, flips over, and now it's warranted that he could be lying in the middle of the street dead, just kind of left there like an animal. And it was that point that I knew that I want this couple, I want part of the reason that this woman does not want to keep trying to be because she does not, why bring a black child into this? And I remember at first, some people had said to me, well, I don't understand why, just because, you know, somebody else's child was shot, I don't understand why she wouldn't, what that has to do with her. And I remember looking at these people like, it has everything to do with her. This is her family. This child would be her family that she's bringing, and we are constantly reading what people think about our families. So why would I want to bring my child into this? But then at the same time, also seeing, mostly on Instagram, and I've read some articles where women were talking about how they weren't sure they wanted to get pregnant. They weren't sure they wanted to have children. And these were black and brown women saying this. And while I knew when the other people said, well, I don't understand why, I knew I was still going to keep going, but the more comments, articles, whatever I read of these women saying, why would I do that to my child? Why would I do that to a child? I knew I just needed to keep going with this.
As a woman of color, I blame Barack Obama for all of my babies because I started having kids when he was president.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hope going around at the time, but despite all the heaviness in your book, there are these moments of hope. Can you talk about maybe how you are layering them in with the grief?
Sure. One of the things I wanted to make sure that I did was, there was so much good for this woman, but a lot of times when you do experience a lot of trauma, that tends to be mainly where you focus. But I wanted her to be a more very well-rounded character. And there's nobody, I'm also a book coach and writing coach, and I had a client once, and there were short stories, and I was going through all the stories, and I remember one of my comments was, does anyone laugh ever? Just ever at all? Does anyone smile about literally anything? Just, it could be bread or toast, jam on toast. Does anybody ever smile? And because not only is that how real life works, there are things, even though there's a lot of stuff, terrible things out there, there are things that still bring us joy no matter how big or small. And then also for the reader, you do need a bit of levity every once in a while. And there's one scene, if I had marked it, I would read it, it's very quick, where she is remembering a time with her father, and where he taught her how to whistle like with blades of grass. And it started out because she couldn't sleep. And I don't usually put my life directly in fiction, but that came directly from my life. I was 5 or 6 years old, and I couldn't sleep one night, and my dad was up working downstairs, and I went downstairs and I said, Daddy, I can't sleep, and he sat me down in front of, this was like 1984. And so we had, the big speakers and the record player and all this stuff. And he sat me down and he put like the big headphones on and he played the Muppets record for me. And that's what's in this book. There's a part where she's just listening to the Muppets record, and it brought me so much joy because it's my dad. Ooh, I talked about this in front of my dad and I didn't even get choked up. I don't know what's happening right now. Because it's my dad, but also I just wanted that lightness for her too, and to show that yes, she came from parents who didn't always handle things right. And my kids are teenagers now, and I am learning what they've taught me over and over and over and over again, is that parents are people. And this is your first time doing this. This is my first time having a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old. And next year will be my first time having a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old, and it's different every time. And you're just people doing your best. And I wanted for her to make it clear her parents were people who were doing their best. And so there needed to be those moments of levity and lightness and just joy with her family too.
No, I think that really comes through. We keep saying her and she. Can you talk a little bit about the choice to leave her unnamed?
Yes, so this is like draft 4.5, 5-ish. For the first 2 drafts, she did have a name. And whenever I talk about it, she's still her name in my head. And so whenever I do any readings or talk about things, I have to be like, don't say her name, don't say her name. But the choice was because this book is so much about identity, and not just identity, racial identity or ethnic or anything like that, or motherhood. It's about so much, and she is someone who, I just feel for her. She feels like everything she does is such a mistake. And so to strip her name was more about where she was and who she was at that time. That she didn't even feel, I'm just going to say, worthy enough of being named, because I'm just a mistake, don't look at me. Even at the end, she's with Noah's mother, and Noah's mother's taking pictures of her, and I think she says something like, oh, there aren't many photos of you online, and she said there's no reason for me to be in front of a lens. She is just someone who wants to be nearly non-existent, because I'm just a mistake, you don't need to look at me. You can look at these other people who I photograph, almost like saying, these people are worthy, but I'm not. So that was why I took her name.
Breaking everybody's heart just a little bit. Well, I have 2 questions now. One, I kind of want to know her name, and you're going to say that. And 2, I can't help but say that you do a really good job of making her a real person, both in terms of the body, which we heard in the excerpt, but also in sort of the stream of consciousness sort of fragments that we get from her. But I think probably because we don't have that much time, maybe we should talk about the husband.
Okay.
Because you make him very real also, and we are not inside his head ever.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about writing Asher in second person?
Sure. So the funny thing is, the book started out with both of them being narrators. And I'll just share the story. When I sent it, when I was querying agents, the woman who was my now agent said, there's something about Asher that just, it's not quite there. Can you consider cutting him as a narrator? And I was like, absolutely not. I didn't say that to her, but like, to myself, I was like, absolutely not. That's like a third of the book. I had to rewrite so many things and blah, blah, blah. And then I had it set aside for several months, and I'll just share, I was diagnosed with MS, multiple sclerosis, about 6 to 8 months after that. And when, after my diagnosis, I made a lot of changes in life. One of them was to quit my job, and the second thing was to go get a master's in fine arts in creative writing. Not because I felt like I needed it for this book, it's just something I always wanted to do, but it was not practical. so I didn't do it. And I got to school, and people were workshopping and just glowing and blah, blah, blah. And I remember reading it. Everyone was saying great things. And I remember reading it, and I was like, damn it, she's right. I need to cut the husband. And it was like a year later, because it just felt, it wasn't sitting right for me anymore. And so I printed the whole thing and went through all of, you know, Asher's parts where it was in first person for him, where he was a narrator. And I took out the bits, what do we actually need to know from and about him? And how can we now frame that in her perspective, or from her perspective, but still feel what Asher is feeling? And so I say that to say it started out because I got really deep into who Asher was in the first place, because he was written as a narrator. And then from there, I was able to cut, just take what I actually needed from him, for him to be a real husband, not just like a dopey white guy who doesn't understand, because that's not what I wanted him to be either. So.
Hearing you talk about that makes me think that you're probably an excellent writing coach, because if you can do that with your own work, I just find myself wondering, how does being a writing coach, does it sometimes, you know, propel you, or does it, you have too many thoughts or too many corrections? I mean, does it affect your work?
Yes and no. So I keep it to a very limited number of people that I work with at a time, because like right now I am deep in a new manuscript, and I want it done and to my agent by June. She has not given me that deadline. I've given myself that deadline. And because quite frankly, I want a book sold this year. So anyway, and so I've put out there, I'm not accepting clients in June and July. So I'm just very protective of my time. And because I do work for myself, and that was when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, that was a big thing for me, was wherever this goes, I don't care what I do, my time is my own. And so I've set my life up in that way. I have a very supportive husband who's been supportive from jump. We've been together, married for 20 years. And I've just set my life up in a way where when it's time for me to be head down into something, I can say, nobody talk to me. My children are old enough now that I can say, unless somebody is bleeding or something is on fire, like, don't talk to me. You'll know how to use the oven, you know where the chicken nuggets are, you know whatever it is, like, go ahead and do that, so I can just be in my work. And my son he's 14, and he's slowly getting what I do now, and then after making Obama's list last year, he's like, oh, so what you do is a real thing. Like, yes, it's a real thing, honey. People read the things that I do. And now they're starting to get it more, and they understand when I say, this is a writing season for me. They know to be like, all right, mom's over there doing whatever she needs to do. So, yeah.
The main character is a photographer, and she converts an old food truck into a mobile darkroom. Can you talk a little bit about the role of artist as documentarian, or perhaps why you chose that role for her?
Yeah. I'll be honest, quite frankly, I've just always been interested in photography, but I don't have the patience enough to be good at it. I even bought a DSLR at one point, and quickly learned buying a film camera is not for me, so just don't. Because it's just so much to learn, and anyway, but I wanted it to be, going back to the identity piece, I wanted her to constantly be looking out. I wanted her to constantly be focused externally. And because what her thing is, because she does feel like she's such a mistake, she does anything she can to deflect any kind of internal anxiety, anything that's going on within her. Yeah, the fact that she was a photographer, one was bloomed out of interest, and then also who she was as a person, and to then kind of turn that into wanting to do a film, a documentary, it seemed pretty natural to me. There a lot of creatives I know, and I'm the same way. You get really good at one thing, and you also dabble in a lot of other creative things, and sometimes too when you're working on a project and you're getting frustrated with the project or something, you're like, I need to go over here and do this other thing. I used to decorate cakes. I used to refurbish furniture. Just, I did a lot of creative things and was decent at it, but again, it's just stuff that I didn't have patience to then make my thing. Writing is, it always came back to, well, I just want to write about the cake. Well, I just want to write about refurbishing furniture. And then I was like, so why don't you just write instead? But yeah, for her it was a very similar thing, but also she felt like speaking to these mothers of the teenagers who were killed and seeing it on film and actually hearing their voices was something that could be even more powerful than, for her anyway, photography. And it was also her way of maybe even subconsciously starting to inch closer to coming to the front for her.
That makes sense. Can we talk about, speaking of photography, Noah, because he is her photography student,
Yeah.
and it is, Noah is the character to whom she explains Blue Hour. And I don't know if it's a spoiler to say that he feels like he's living, that character is living in his own version of a Blue Hour in that moment.
No, there is this scene where, so Blue Hour in photography is, I know exactly how many minutes, but it's not very long, right before sunrise and right before sundown, I think, where I think it says that light is evenly dispersed, something like that, and so it casts like this haze of blue over everything. And when I was looking at photos that people had taken during Blue Hour, there was just such a serenity, and that is the thing that the main character and even Noah are striving for. It's just this peace and serenity in their life. And so the fact that they ended up together and at that moment and had it was very important.
No, in the book, she captures it so well. She has Noah put his hand up to the sky and then take the photo.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. Photos play a big role in this book. There's a moment where the main character is photographing Cynthia, Noah's mother, without her knowledge. And then at the end of the book, Cynthia is photographing the main character. Can you talk a little bit about that switch that made it happen?
Yeah, again, her photographing, taking these photos of Noah's mother and taking photos of, because what she did before was other women who have experienced miscarriage, really was a way of looking at herself without looking at herself. She wants to be as distant from herself as possible. And also, your stuff, the epilogue, is that what it's called? The quote in the front, yeah. I'm gonna be real. I have an MFA and all kinds of stuff. I don't remember terms all the time, and sometimes I have to look things up. There was a guy in my program who was talking, we were workshopping, and he was like, oh yeah, the epistolary format, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, oh yeah. And as soon as we were done, I Googled what epistolary meant. Like, I don't always know the terms and things. And so anyway, but I'm pretty sure it's epilogue, is by James Baldwin, and it says, all art is a kind of confession, more or less oblique. All artists, if they are to survive, are forced at last to tell the whole story, to vomit the anguish up. And that's essentially what she's doing in this whole book, because she is an artist, and she is dealing with so much. And you know, when you push stuff down and push stuff down and push stuff out, eventually it starts just popping out in places where you don't want it to, you don't expect it to, you don't like it, but it just happens. And our subconscious will do that to us sometimes and for us. And I think her constantly looking out, again, and taking these photos was her way of getting as close to herself as she could handle, truly. And then at the end, where the lens is switched and Noah's mother is taking photos of her, it's truly just her arc. And I didn't want it to be where, like, no, everything's great and grand, and this main character is just fantastic, and she's going to live a great life. And it was more that she even allowed someone to point the lens at her. And dare to take a photo. It's not going anywhere. She just pushed a button, but she allowed it to happen. And that was a really big thing.
You surround the main character with other female characters. She has a good friend, she has a sister, we get to meet Noah's mother. And it seems like all of the female characters in the book are also mothers.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the choice to sort of surround her, or at least place her in these sort of interesting intersections?
Yeah, primarily, so her sister's children are older. I forget how old, like 12 to 13, 12, 13. And her one friend's child is a toddler. And with the sister, so one thing, we all know that racism exists, and we have known it for a very long time. The difference between, I'll just go with 2014 to, let's say, 1990, is that exactly what I started saying. I was reading on Facebook all these things that people were saying. So we have, in our back pocket, in our purse, wherever you keep your phones, access to what is in people's brains, to what people think about us 24/7. Whereas somebody who, let's say, 1985, I don't know, I was only like 6, but still, 1985, yeah, racism exists and things are harder for black and brown people, and et cetera, but you aren't as close, maybe. I'm not gonna speak for everybody. A lot of people weren't as close to, well, Fred in Iowa said, you didn't know what Fred in Iowa said. Mm-hmm. And so there was still this feeling of there was enough hope to hang on to, and like we can still have our happiness. And then for her friend, I think it was more that she and her husband they just decided we're still gonna have this family. And then knowing, because there's a part, her friend's husband is Jameson, where Jameson even expresses a lot of anger. He wants to go to this protest that's happening, and she encourages him not to go. He's like, this is for my family. Because why also, just because we're black, why would we deny ourselves the joy of having a family? Mm-hmm. And at the same time, now we have to be on edge. We have to, the year that the George Floyd verdict came out, my son, he really loved walking up and down the street with, I don't know what it is about tween boys, teenage boys, why they want to wear a hoodie and like sweatpants when it's 95 degrees outside. But he was very much into that with his hood up and everything. And I remember my husband and I saying, you know what? How about we're just not going to do that for a few days. I know you like to just go out by yourself, and that's great, but we're just not going to do that. I think he was maybe like 11, 12. And then trying to explain why, like he's a child, and he's looking at you like, I hear words and I understand what these words are, but I don't, so why can't I just be outside? So, yeah, I mean, having her friends still have a child, like I said, their child was a toddler, was more, we get to have happiness too. Mm-hmm. It might come at a greater price, but we get to have happiness too.
I like what you said about our relationship to technology,
yeah.
And how it kind of, now we have a body of collective knowledge. Toward the end of the book, the couple is at a farmer's market and 2 oranges roll off the table, and the husband character leans down to pick them up, and when he comes back up, the world is different. Everybody else in the farmer's market has received an alert on their phone.
Yeah.
And I think your book is kind of getting at the quickness of the change.
Right.
You do a really good job of balancing this personal, I mean, in the excerpt that you read, it's a very personal moment, and yet it's a collective moment. So you're balancing this collective identity and the personal identity. Could you maybe talk about, was that difficult to make sure you're maintaining?
It was more, so going to the excerpt, there were just a lot of women around me at the time, not even necessarily like close friends or anything, but I just kept hearing because blogging was still pretty big at the time. And so there are these like pockets of the internet where people were kind of like shyly talking about miscarriage, but feeling like there's still shame around talking about miscarriage. And I just remember I kept thinking, I don't understand why there would be shame around something that your body just decided to do for whatever reason. And then just reading about how mothers-in-laws or whoever would share comments about, well, maybe if you, and it just really blew my mind. And the number of people women who've said that they just keep it quiet. And I even remember when I was pregnant with my daughter, I'd first gotten pregnant with her, a friend of mine, I announced it, and a friend of mine was like, oh, how many weeks are you? And I said, I think it was like 5 or 6 weeks. And she said, oh, I'm surprised you're telling people. And I said, why? And she was like, oh, just in case you miscarry. And I said, oh. And I was 27 at the time. I had no idea so many women miscarried. I didn't realize that it was such a thing. And I'm sitting there like, this should be, why isn't this information that people know more about? And why is this something that we're hiding? And just feeling shame around. And so a lot of what I get, feedback I get from this is how raw it was. And I said they deserve to feel raw. It's a horrible thing that is happening. And they deserve to experience all of the ugliness that comes with it. And I wanted people to just really be, women to really be able to see and experience and feel ways that maybe they didn't feel, quote, allowed to feel during their experience, or even if they hadn't experienced it. Just the simple fact that, oh, this is a woman who is not afraid to fully express herself no matter what is happening. And that, some of that is personal too, in that I'm very much a sensitive person, and my whole entire life I've gotten, you need thicker skin, why are you so sensitive? Why this, why that? No, I'm very sensitive to like a lot of lights or a lot of sound or whatever else. Stop being dramatic. And then when I started hearing about like highly sensitive people and stuff, I just wanted to be like, do y'all see? This is a thing. I'm not making stuff up. And even, I'm not saying she's a highly sensitive person, but what I am saying is just seeing somebody be so expressive and be unashamed about being so expressive. And then to the point about like social media or just having news in your back pocket all the time, it's just where we are now. It's really just where we are. And I don't think that the book would have been true if I had left that piece out.
No. Before I ask another question, do you know how we're doing on time?
You've got maybe 3 or 4 minutes and then open it up for the...
Okay. The book jacket poses a question. What is motherhood in the midst of uncertainty, buried trauma, and an unraveling America? And the answer that is offered on the jacket is what it's always been, a love song.
Yeah.
And that felt really true in the reading of the book, but it also felt like the obvious connection would be a love song from a mother to a child, but it felt very much like both a love song from the author to us, to the women who needed to hear it,
Yeah.
but also a love song one sings to oneself. And I wondered if you wanted to, was that the intent, or?
So, can I be for real?
Please.
When I read that, I was like, oh, are they talking about my book? My publisher wrote that. And the reason I'm saying that, sometimes I'm what I consider a very intuitive writer. I don't plan out a lot of stuff. It just kind of happens for me. And when I read that, I don't always know that that's what I'm doing, but when somebody gives words to something, because it was very much a love letter to herself. And then when I saw, they expanded it out to motherhood too. And then even, yes, that's what what's it called? How it started off?
What is motherhood?
It is motherhood, right. The book was also a letter to Asher, her husband, and what happened was, which also kind of aligns with how the book was written in the first place, when I said it started out between, with it being both of them, having both of them as narrators, and then it just became hers. The epistolary part, the letter to him, it tapers off towards the end because she discovers this is really about me. This isn't really about him as much as I thought. This isn't so much me explaining things to him as I thought it was. This is about me getting to know myself better. And I think that's the love song, or love story rather, to yourself. It touches everything. So yeah, I want to say, was it deliberate? And then I was like, I'm gonna write a love story to myself. No. But reading through it and then talking about it with my publisher, and then coming together with calling it Motherhood, a Love Story. To read it, yeah, this is a love story to herself, this is a love story to her child, this is a love story to her husband, this is a love story to anyone who reads it.
Thank you for that. I needed that love story.
Am I allowed to be real like that? I don't know. Don't say stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, so does anybody have questions for Tiffany? We have someone down front.
So I'm here with part of my book club here. I'm from Richmond, right here, this row. So hi from Richmond to Rosa, first of all, since you're a Richmond teacher. But even though I have not read the book, part of the reason that I bought it was because I have a good friend whose best friend growing up was a young woman whose father was an African-American soldier and whose mother was Japanese. And so I was wondering why you chose Japan as as part of the author's identity, as opposed to some other ethnic group, Chinese or Korean or white, sure. And just what was in your mind.
So part of that is pulled from real life too, and I'm not going to get into my family's business, but I have a relative who was with someone who's Japanese, and there was some tension about the fact that this person was black and he was with someone who was Japanese. And the longer version, so this book was originally like 66,000 words, I cut it in half. That part was a greater piece of the story before. And when I cut it out, I still wanted to keep that as her identity, because, and there's a part in there where she talks briefly about how, I think it was her grandmother referred to her mother as the Black Devil or something like that. And because it was still prevalent. And so that's the main reason, was pulling from something that I knew in my family.
Well, I have a question. Have people, when you've talked to readers, have they responded to, the whole issue of women having miscarriages? Because I come from a long line of people who had miscarriages, and I just wondered.
I mean, mostly what I've heard is thank you. And thank you for allowing the character to have such a raw experience. I even had a therapist reach out who does grief counseling, who said she'll be using Blue Hour as part of her therapy with some of her clients. And so yeah, that's been the biggest response about the miscarriage piece is, one, they don't feel like they can talk about it. Thank you for talking about it. And two, thank you for being allowing her to be so honest about it. So
So this is a two-part
process question,
Yeah.
I guess. How do you school your characters based on feedback? And I don't mean teach. I mean, how do you continue? You know how you'll write a passage or you'll write, and then you show it to an editor and they go, and how do you then like adjust these characters to the feedback?
I don't. I tell people, so I applied to an MFA program when I was 39. So I was grown. And I say it's a good thing I did not go when I was like 24 or whatever, when I wanted to, because I would have gotten into a program and been like, oh, I just want to please you, and I want to make sure this is right, and I want to make sure this is right. I had a rough few years. I was just diagnosed with this disease, and at the time, I was on a treatment that could potentially give me a fatal brain infection and all kinds of, I really didn't care. I really did not care what other people had to say, and quite frankly, and that's not me saying I'm above criticism, I'm not. But I went to grad school with a vision, and I went there to work with people who were better than I was to help me see that vision. If they could show me something, if they told me something that I was like, you know what? That is, yes, I want to go that way. Same way with my agent saying you need to cut the husband, and I was like, absolutely not. And then I came around to it myself and realized actually that makes the story far more powerful. Had I done that 2 years prior, I don't know that it would have been the same story, because I have to arrive there myself and know that it's right for myself. But for the most part, I mean, if something's confusing, sure, but I'm not changing my people just because.
The second part of the question is, as a writing coach
Yeah.
and a sensitive person, self-described sensitive person, how does that influence your coaching?
So, I tend to just attract a lot of sensitive people. I'm on Instagram mostly, and I have a newsletter, and I talk about a lot of the way I say I'm a feelings first literary coach. Feelings first, logic later, because it's not that logic doesn't play a part, but if I did everything according to rules like I did my whole life, then no, it's not gonna, this doesn't happen. Obama doesn't happen. And the way I look at it is, so I used to start out where I would be like, oh, I have to be so gentle and so kind all the time and so this, and I found I was getting frustrated. And I said, wait a minute, I am my own client, and I'm not someone who needs to be coddled. You can give feedback, like one thing, I don't believe in, well, I'm gonna be brutally honest, or actually you could just be honest. You don't need to be brutal. You could just be honest. And I have a client who, she just wrote a testimonial that said something like, she is kind, and she is funny, and she does not suffer fools. Like, I will let you know, what does this mean? When I come across a sentence, and a lot of times they'll be like, well, it means that, da, 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 da. Say that. All this pontification, you don't, and trying to make it pretty, I don't know what any of that means. And because probably I do it in a more funny way sometimes, it lands a lot better. But then also, what a lot of people have just said is, I feel really safe when I'm around you, and so they know that nothing I say is coming from an ill place. I'm not trying to cut anybody down. And the thing too is, I've been through the MFA system, and a lot of people, or I shouldn't say a lot, some people, when I graduated, I heard comments like, this made me feel like I'm not sure if I should be writing. Or people who, I have a friend who was in the program with me, who she would try and apply every single device that we learned to her writing. I was like, you write like that? And she said, yes, it's terrible. It sounds terrible. I don't think about anything that we talk about in seminar when I write. I think about how my character is feeling, how I want the scene to feel, and what emotions do I need to dig up within myself to then put into that character. And when I think why a lot of more sensitive people feel safe with me too is they know that they're being sensitive or being emotional is finally seen as, this is wonderful. This is, not only is it just normal, this is, for lack of a better word, this is a superpower as a novelist or someone writing memoir or whatever it is. That I can dip into feeling this well, because if a book or a story or whatever doesn't make you feel anything, what's the point? And so I think a lot of the reason I attract so many people that tend to be self-diagnosed, whatever it's called, highly sensitive, or just sensitive in general, is because they know that I'm that way, and I'm never gonna look at them like, because sometimes people have been like, oh, I feel, and they won't say it, I'll say it for them, you feel like you don't deserve for me to look at your work? And a number of them have said yes. But they still signed up, and I'm like, you took the step even afraid, and you know, and they're like, I knew I would just be safe here, but still I feel like I'm wasting your time. Because we've got our whole lives conditioned to feel like we are wasting people's time when we want to prioritize our own stuff. So, yeah.
So a couple of things, wow, that's really loud. A couple of things that you just said has me even more curious about. Number one, you said one of your classmates said that because of the MFA program, that she or he were trying to remember everything that you all were learning, and you were like, I'm just worried about my characters or my scene. So my question number one is, would you recommend that writers get an MFA if their goal is not to, be a tenure track professor of writing literature? And number two, when you're writing about such emotionally freighted and weighted, grief, mourning, shame, anger, all of that, did you find that you had to kind of get yourself up on a daily or whatever your writing process was, or afterward, did you have to like go have a drink or go have a massage, or, was that hard to be writing in such an emotionally elevated state all the time?
Yeah. For the first question about the MFA, that's really such a personal decision. I know that's not the answer. So I went for an MFA because I thought I wanted to be a professor, and a professor of English. And like I said, for this book, I really just wanted to work with people who were better than me. And I didn't believe that I needed to get an MFA to get an agent. I never believed that. There are way too many people who are not agented. And I'll be honest, I have had people say, you wrote this in an MFA program? And I would say, why? And they're like, because sometimes books written in an MFA program sound like they were manufactured in an MFA program. And this doesn't feel that way. And I said, it's kind of the same thing I said. I went in there at 39 years old, not at 20, and knowing what I wanted this to be. And I let that be my guide. I never took my eye off. This is who this character is, and I know that at my bones, help me make her the strongest character she could possibly be. And I let that be my North Star. I just stuck with that. And it's also a matter of of honoring what your process is. I know that my process is not to read 12 craft books or sit in a seminar and take all those things and be like, okay, I'm working on this chapter. How does what I learned today apply here? Because it may not. It may not apply at all. But what I do find is there was one seminar that we took about using the setting to help set the tone of the book. And did I go and change all of Blue Hour? No, but sometimes when I'm writing now, I'll remember a couple, like just one little thing from that seminar and be like, oh, at this part that I'm writing a book that's more of like a descent into madness. And so talking about things, landscape that does show something descending makes sense, and using things like hills and going downward or whatever it is. So it's not that it's not something that's helpful, but to sit down and be like, I'm going to take everything I learned this week and put it into this chapter. What? Why? That, again, it just feels terrible. But I could, again, if I had gone to school earlier, I could see myself doing that. I call myself sometimes a recovering good girl, because I want to please the professor, and I want to do it right. And doing it right sometimes, for me, doing it right is the way that I know when my body feels well. I may not be able to explain to somebody else why it's right, but I just know that it's right. So this is how it's going to be. And my way of writing, like I said, is more intuitive. I was talking with someone this morning who said they don't have an MFA, but they were in a class and they were like mapping everything out. She was like, oh my gosh, I can't do that. And I was like, what? I tried mapping out a book once. It was awful. I was just frustrated. My book literally comes to me as I'm writing. I'm one of those people who get into the shower and then will have a whole just, this is what it needs to be. And I can't do that sitting in front of a laptop or a piece of paper being like, and in Act 3, this is gonna happen. I don't know what's happening in Act 3 until I get there. And then it was, the emotional piece. So I don't think of myself as someone who compartmentalizes really well a lot, but for some reason when I'm writing books I can. There are a lot of things that I can't do or I don't think I'm great at, and the exception usually comes with writing books. I can allow myself to go into a really deep, dark place, and then, so, no, I don't get a drink. What I tend to do is I'll turn on 90s Will and Grace and watch like 4 episodes and just be happy, and then that's about it. But, for example, this one I'm writing, it's dark in a very different way, because they started out being like high on the psychopathy scale, and there are certain things where there's one scene I wrote that I was like, whoa, that's in your brain. And like I had to just kind of sit with myself for a minute. But then at the end of it, really what happens is, I'm like, oh, I did that. That's really cool that I could do that. And yeah, now I'm gonna go eat some dinner, and it might take a little bit to shake it off, and I might have to listen to some different, like I use music a lot when I'm working. Listen to a different kind of music to help change my mood a bit, but I don't find that I get stuck really. And that's something a lot of clients do come to me for, is they're like, I am writing fiction, but I'm bringing a lot of my personal stuff into fiction, and I don't want to get stuck there. And I help them with tools to get them out of that. But, and I'll do it I don't have to go as deep. Like I said, I can watch 2 episodes of Will and Grace and be good. Some people, they need a couple days afterwards. And then also sometimes it just depends on the scene or scenes that I've been writing, how deep they go. So.
I think we have time for like one more question.
There's someone in the back.
Okay.
I can talk loud.
But you won't be recorded.
Oh.
Sorry.
On the first page of your book, you say it all started with metamorphosis, talking about her relationship with her husband. Mm-hmm. And metamorphosis keeps popping up here and there throughout the book. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, there are also metamorphoses that happen in the book. Sure. But we had a discussion in the book club here mm-hmm. about which metamorphosis are you talking about? Is this Kafka, and the cockroach?
Yes.
Or, yeah, or is it some other metamorphosis? And maybe you could say a little bit more about how it plays a role in the book.
For her, it was more, not even just for her, because like I said in the beginning, it was more about the two of them and just their change and going into a place that could be perceived as really ugly, but actually it was just really honest. And a place that they needed to go to honestly for the both of them to survive as a couple. And these two people really, really loved each other and love each other. And her husband was just so afraid of going into, one, the darkness, and two, I think the darkness of her own, I'm gonna call it a little bit of madness even for her, and her just allowing herself to face any ugliness within herself. And so that was the main thing, was just me thinking mostly about the cockroach. And yeah, does that answer your question? Okay.
Okay, love to end with cockroaches, right? So, books for sale, authors there. Thank you very much for a wonderful
Thank you
discussion.
all.
Thank you.